So, hey, Matt, how's it going?
Good. How you doing there, Ed?
I'm
Been a
doing all
while.
right. Yeah, absolutely. It's been a little bit of a while, so we've got to get together soon, and I can get you some copies of those CDs, and we can maybe grab dinner and catch up a little bit.
That'd be
So,
fantastic.
yeah,
I've seen a bunch of I've seen your kind of posts about the songs and videos and stuff like that. So that's been really cool.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been an interesting. It's a new foray for me into the world of social media, so I'm definitely getting used to it. But it's cool. It's cool that there's been, it's a cool group. It seems like so. That's I'm glad that
Right.
we've got people who like the work that we've done and sort of appreciate it.
That's
So
cool.
in that regard too, it's there were some folks who were definitely interested in hearing some behind the scenes stuff, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk to you, as you're such an accomplished producer, you've got
Oh,
such
sure.
world experience. People would love to hear your perspectives, and
Yeah.
we had some questions, so I figure we might as well jump right into it and answer some of the questions that we got. If
Yes.
that's cool with you.
That sounds great.
All right, awesome. So the first question we got was what attracted you to working with this project, and what generally attracts you to a project, or what makes you decide whether or not you want to work on something.
That's a good question. I don't have a recollection of hearing all of your songs early on, but I remember hearing Love Song, and we started on that song. And I think the thing that was compelling and intriguing for me, and interestingly for the musicians that worked on it, is there's a singularity about what you're doing musically. It's hard to express this, but most people, when they're doing music, they have kind of an agenda or an end goal, or they want to make it, or they want to something about it. It just feels a little bit kind of preconceived. And your music, starting with Love Song, was just almost the rawest, closest to the bone thing I'd heard in quite a while. And it just felt like there's lack of artifice when you do your music. It just feels like it's a direct connection to what you're trying to express, which is honestly a little odd to get my head around, because there's something about it that just felt very much at the surface and very much like right there. And so that was really something to go, oh, this is interesting. This guy that wrote this music, and he just basically wants the emotion out there. He's not even particularly concerned with adhering to any kind of conforming the music to fit anyone else's idea. So it was really something. And I remember that when we worked on Love Song.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, not working with a label, and not having those kinds of constrictions, you can kind of just do it the way that you want to do it, or the way that you feel it. And I'm,
Yeah.
really appreciative of the fact that you took that and ran with it.
Yeah.
And we weren't trying to sort of create something, put it in a box that everybody's used to. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very cool experience for me too. So that's awesome to hear. I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So
My pleasure. My pleasure.
cool, cool. Yeah. So, and I guess going from there too, the next question is: were there any unique challenges with this project compared to others you've worked on in the past? And obviously, you've worked with so many successful artists, so many label artists, people
Right.
that are well known, and this
Right.
being an independent project. What were some of the challenges that you saw that maybe you either weren't expecting or?
I think it was a challenge in that I had to work a little more thoughtfully and be a little more tuned in to get your trust in what we were trying to accomplish. Sometimes if I'm working with a band, there's like three or four or five people, so it feels a little more. It feels a little easier because I can, if I'm not quite connecting with one of the people in the band, I can connect with somebody else. And for you, because it felt like these songs were so close to your heart, and I know some of them were older songs, maybe a good portion of them are, but they're still very much alive
Yeah,
in the emotions behind them. And even though they were initially written for specific people, the fact that they still feel relatively universal because it's still relationship based stuff, and it's still about, I mean, most of them obviously, they're generally about love and or just being, I guess, the human condition, things like that. So for me, it was a little challenging to get your trust in terms of, okay, let's work on these arrangements, let's try some different things. And as a producer, it's very difficult sometimes because I have got experience and some success, and I've got some knowledge, and I know I can bring something to the table,
yeah,
but I'm always on the cusp of don't mess it up. And I know that I've usually got pretty good instincts, and I believe that I'm going the right direction. But honestly, this is a very delicate dance between myself and an artist such as yourself, and to like know, when to push and when to pull back. It's almost like fishing, to be really kind of, proletariat about the whole thing. It's like when you're fishing and you got your hook in the water, and if you pull too hard, you snap the line.
Yeah.
But if you just hang on and just give a little bit of room, and you pull a little bit, then you let it loose and pull it back. And again, it's just a matter of earning trust, so that the point where you as an artist could be like, okay, this guy, it's apparent he's got my best interests at heart. Whether
Yeah.
or not he's got the right idea every time, we will discover that. But it feels like he really wants my very, very best. And I feel that once I get to that point with an artist, specifically with you, when you go, okay, he's all in, then I think it's easier to trust me, because I've bared myself and said, listen, this is how we can make it great.
Right. That's interesting. I felt that trust with you right from the get go. Like I never felt that there was anything where, if there was ever a perception that you might have felt about overstepping, I never felt that way at all. In fact, we changed some of these songs based on your feedback pretty early on. I mean, I remember we changed the arrangement for Grey Wolf around a little bit. We changed the chord structure on Mountain based on some of your feedback. So we definitely did some different things right from the very beginning, because I did trust your instincts, and I knew that you had my vision and best interest at heart. So that was never a consideration for me. So it's interesting to know that that's a consideration for you.
Very much so. In fact, usually before, I mean, we didn't really have the hard start that I've had on other projects. Say if there was a label paying for, there's a hard start, and usually the night before, I'm just up at night like, oh my God, I hope I don't mess this up. I don't want to, screw things up. I don't want to ruin this band or this artist's, intentions or what they're trying to get out there. But with you, because you and I, we kind of morphed into it. We started with Love Song, and that one kind of took on a life of its own, and it felt like it was successful. And I think after that, you're like, oh, okay, let's try a couple more songs. And we kind of tiptoed into it, which is a nice way to do it, because there was no kind of inherent pressure to get it right at the get-go. We could kind of feel each other out, and you'd be like, okay, you didn't mess that one up. Let's try another one. You know what I mean? That was a real nice way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it took a long time, partially because of COVID, and hopefully the next one wouldn't be quite as. I mean, now that we sort of understand the process, it's like I run through it so much faster than we did the first time. But it was good. It was a good way for the whole thing to develop and really come to fruition.
Yes.
So
and there's a rumor that somebody in the creative side of things may or may not have injured his foot, and may have had some health issues here and there.
Right. Yeah, that's what hockey will do to you. For sure. All right. So the next question that came up is how. It's an interesting one. It's a general question for you, but how is the production process different now compared to when you began your career? And I think tied into this part of the other question is, do you miss working analog, or has digital streamlined the process enough that you really don't anymore?
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, the biggest change in what we did in the last couple of years from when I started, I believe, most obviously, is just the quality in songwriting and the quality of musicianship. And so I'm at a place now where like I can work with people who have been doing it or have like something that they really need to express. And obviously, a lot of the musicians we use were, I mean, like the guy Josh Freese who played on your album, now plays for the Foo Fighters.
I know, right? That's amazing.
And the Foo Fighters could have chosen any drummer in the world, and that's who they picked. So there's that. And as to the difference between analog and digital, for me personally, the best part about digital is that it's non-destructive editing. So if we want to try changing arrangements, we can cut digitally, and we can always reassemble it. There's no harm, no foul. With analog, I used to cut 2-inch tape, and that's really where you're betting your career, because if you make a mistake, it's destructive editing. It's hard to repair it. The plus side of analog is that I do believe that limitations are absolutely ideal, because if, like with the records I've made where you only have 24 tracks, it's like you have to accomplish the song in 24 tracks. And if you have too many instrumental ideas, then you have to decide which ones aren't viable and get rid of them. And there's an economy to that, because also as you're recording 24 track, you're kind of mixing as you progress, especially if you do 8 track or 16 track, because you have to kind of imagine the end result of the record. And with 8 track, I combined drums to 2 channels, so that was a commitment. And I would record the guitar with the effects and with the EQs. So for better or for worse, digital will allow you to postpone a lot of decisions, and that is not necessarily good.
Interesting. Sort of a wealth of, or an abundance, or too much information to deal with, too much to choose from. It's like
too many options. There's too many options. And because I've mixed people's records, or where they'll send me stuff and they'll have like a DI of the guitar with a plug-in, and they'll be like, well, you can just change the amp sound. It's like, that's not how this works. When you're making a record, you get your drums and bass, and you record maybe a bright Stratocaster, and you want to overdub something, then you'll overdub a darker, Les Paul. And you're painting a palette so that on the Les Paul side, it's a little warmer and darker, so we can actually put the piano on that side. And then on the Telecaster side, where it's really bright, we can put some, if there's a low-end Moog part or something like that. So there's a lot that you're trying to kind of imagine and bring to fruition as you're going along. So when you get to the mixing stage, it's almost like you just kind of push up the faders and go, there's the song, let's do a couple balances. Now, when you have songs where you have like 120 tracks and people want you to make a decision on what guitar sound or what's keyboard sound, oh, here's the MIDI for the keyboard, what do you want to do? It's like, yeah, that's production now. So I think that the fact that you can postpone decisions, for me, is not ideal. It can work. It's just not a crutch that I think people should rely on.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess it sounds like what you're saying is it makes the mixing process a lot more involved. And a lot of those decisions that would have in the past been done during the production process have now been delayed.
Yes. Yeah. But at least with your album, we were working like, shoulder to shoulder throughout the whole thing. And as we developed sounds and added things, you and I could make decisions, go, that's good, let's keep it. This thing we don't need anymore. So at least with you and me, it did have a natural flow. We were good at editing and culling what was important and what was essential and what things we could kind of put more towards the background. And because your record is similar to ELO records that can be at sometimes dense, with all the instruments we have, drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, but also a full orchestra. And then there's vocals, background vocals, and everything else. So relatively challenging because there's a lot of information, because you have a lot of ideas you want to express. And it is an old school thing where you have multiple layers that a listener can lean into and listen with headphones and go, oh, wow, I heard this really cool little keyboard part on the side, or I heard this really cool background vocal.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when I listen to it, especially on headphones, I mean, I think this is a record that you really need to listen to on headphones, because you hear all of that. And some of the subtle placements and everything, it's like, wow, you've really made everything fit in the pocket.
Yes.
Like, I could never have done that myself. It's like, I mean, that's just years of experience and success in your industry. But yeah, really, really amazing, especially when you're capturing that orchestra. They have, I mean, one thing I think I recently said in a commentary was, what I like about the orchestra is that you can sort of work in so many of these different parts, but it's still kind of cohesive because it's a single instrument in a way. The orchestra itself. It's not like you've got keyboards versus guitars versus backing. It's one solid thing. But
but that's a really, really good point, because this is absolutely the first and thus far only time where the orchestra was ultimately important. And I remember you and I recorded drums, bass, guitars, and maybe some preliminary keyboards, and we actually left a lot of room for the orchestra to do its thing. And then we added the additional keyboards, and then we added the additional guitar parts. And you and I had an idea that the orchestra was in fact a singular instrument. And sometimes it would rise in the mix and present itself and have a theme or a melody or something like that. And it would kind of tuck back in and be more of a pad. But it was, I think for you and I, if we had to put a hierarchy of important instruments, it would be voice, some kind of chordal, either a keyboard or guitar, strings, and then everything else, because it really was like the strings really dictated a lot of this record. And to me, that's absolutely unique, because everything else I've done before, that the orchestra or the strings are always kind of last minute, kind of secondary. Let's just fill in the gaps. But this was like the orchestra was the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, well, we got to pay attention to this thing. Yes, we can, sprinkle some keyboards or add a couple of guitar parts or do a vocal harmony. But it was really fascinating to approach a record with that in mind, and that is absolutely singular for me in my career.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's the thing that really drew me to those ELO records from the '70s, and I knew that Jeff Lynne had, from everything that I've read, that was his intention, to make the strings the center point. So that was really the first thing that was recorded for them for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we kind of stayed true to that concept with this record.
Yes.
I mean, most of the guitar, so I mean, Mike Ward can come in and just drop a guitar solo in on anything, quickly.
Yes.
But we did leave a lot of that to the end, and we said, let's get the strings built up first, and then we'll see what space we have left, and build the traditional sort of rock instrumentation around it. And
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, further to your point, the strings informed the overdubs, which is not how it usually goes. It's usually the overdubs do the thing, then the strings have to kind of fit in there. But and because they were so important in your conceptualization of this record, and they were such an important element, and because ELO did influence you quite a bit, and we want to really make sure that they were prominent, and that they were going to rise and fall, and they were going to poke their head out and say, here we are, which was really something to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to give Steve Turner a ton of credit too for those arrangements. I mean,
Yeah.
he knew exactly what we were looking for. I mean, yeah, he performed with the ELO, so it's like he knew exactly what we were going for, and he just delivered incredible arrangements. I love them.
Absolutely. He was shockingly spot on, because I remember he would do the rough drafts, and he'd mock them up with his digital string samples and things like that. And you and I were listeners like, oh my God, I mean, it's pretty much perfect. You and I might make a couple of little notes, but I think he really listened to you. I think he really understood what you were trying to do, which is very, very rare to get someone who really knocks it out of the park like that. And he absolutely paid attention. And man, I remember talking to you. I was like, I couldn't understand or fathom how he could continue to come up with really cool, interesting parts and not repeat himself.
Right.
Because if I were doing it, it'd be like, oh, there's that theme again. Yeah, we heard that in the last 5 songs. And every time he did something, it's like, where did that come from? And
right.
Shockingly talented. Absolutely.
And he's a great guy too. If you've had a chance to hang with him a bit over in Glasgow when we did the string solos, he's a good guy, and he's really, really excellent at what he does. So we're very fortunate to find him, for sure.
Yeah, that was all you. You found him. You did the primary communication. That was a fantastic collaboration between the two of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Another question. How different is it working with modern independent artists versus the primarily major labels that were creating most music for public consumption in the past? I mean, I guess we talked a little bit about this. It's sort of like if you're working with an independent artist, I guess you don't have the constraints of a label. So you can probably, I would imagine, dictate the course of the progression of a recording of a record. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an expected point of friction or point of conflict to have a record label and an artist, and invariably the producer is in the middle of all that, and trying to reconcile those two factions can be exceptionally challenging. Sometimes it can be very fruitful. You can have an A&R person or somebody at a label who is very astute, and they can help actually push you to your better abilities, your higher abilities, and better songs. And sometimes I've worked with people who weren't very effective. The nice thing about your project, again, going back to the singularity about what you tried to express as an artist, we followed through with that the way we constructed the album, because it was really following your heart and your guts and your experience. It was able to be really focused and supportive of your initial kind of impetus, the genesis of these songs. And so we were able to do that without encumbrances. We were able to do that without anybody kind of muddying the water or softening or rounding off anything. We were able to just kind of go. There was a certain proud is not the right word, but there's a confidence of direction that was happening in your song and the recording that was very much like we weren't going to take any prisoners. We weren't going to compromise. And what we wanted to do was accomplish whatever you had. My idea was whatever you had in your head and in your heart, I wanted to get that. And fortunately, there was nothing to obscure that. There was no A&R person. There's no label. There's no manager. And we could just look at each other like, is this as good as it can be? Great. If it wasn't, we'd fix it. But we didn't have anybody else meddling or putting their thumb on the scale or trying to change things. So we were able to, I think, move very freely and also make a record that is just so unique in that regard.
Yeah, I mean the uniqueness for sure. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it this way because you just don't hear something like that anymore.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, a lot
And
of
it's yeah, and it's influenced obviously by ELO and among other artists, Elton John and other people like that. But even with that influence, like I don't hear when I play it to people, they don't go, that's obviously ELO. They just go, oh wow, that's really cool. Um, oh wow, there's some cool strings in there. And then sometimes I have to kind of go, yeah, you ever listen to ELO? Like, oh yeah, I guess it kind of sounds like that, but it doesn't lead with this is ELO. And even the way Steve did the strings, I know he worked with Jeff Lynne, but he also has his own ideas,
yeah,
and I believe he was given a lot more freedom with you that he probably usually is with someone like Jeff Lynne, where he was able to just you gave him the reins and go, just take it and let's go. And I think when you empower someone like Steve, who's got that kind of ability, it's pretty amazing that can happen. Where he just kind of does his thing.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we worked with I think the first song that he and I sort of was Mountain. It was probably the first one.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, just we got feedback from you. You heard it. We had my ideas, your ideas. We gave it back to Steve, made a couple of revisions. And then literally after that, he knew kind of what our preferences were. And he
Uh-huh.
applied that to all of the subsequent arrangements. And
Right.
like you said, we had such little input on the rest of it
Right.
because they were really, right there.
Right. Yep. Yep.
So that was pretty awesome. So
Yeah.
you're in your studio right now.
Yes, I'm in the studio. Just want to get out of the way. I had someone enter into the entryway. We got another engineer, so I thought I'd scooch back in here where it's a little quieter.
Okay, it's interesting because we got a question on Atmos because I know that that's a huge huge thing that you're working on, and you might even be able to take some pictures of that because I think it'd be interesting for
Yeah.
folks who
Oh
might
yeah.
not know what this is, the
Yeah. So
surround. So
that
if
was.
you want to talk about it a little bit, the question specifically was: we understand you've been remixing a great many classic records using this technology for major labels.
Yes.
And how would the average listener be able to experience this new technology for themselves? And
Right.
if you can show us your studio a little bit, or you probably just did a quick little pass, but yeah, talk
Right.
about it a little bit, like because that's a big part of what you're doing now on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much the primary way that I've been doing a lot of work recently. So with Atmos, because you have 7 speakers at ear level and then 4 speakers above the listening position, you can spread music out. You got a much bigger, wider, broader, taller palette. And so, especially with records that are similar to yours, where there's a lot of information going on, with the advent of Atmos, you can actually hear more music. You can hear more specific things going on, and it's really stunning. In a room with speakers, it's unbeatable. There's nothing that comes close. They do this thing where they do a Apple and Dolby and who else is it? They do Amazon and Tidal. They do a binaural fold down, which is basically they try to replicate what you hear in the room into speakers, and it's actually very very close. Especially the Tidal and the Amazon version of it sounds very much like the room to an extent. A lot of people are starting to get these little sound bars they put in their houses, and they have a sound bar in the front, and then they'll put a couple of satellite speakers, and it actually replicates it quite well. But more importantly, all the major car manufacturers now are starting to put in Atmos. That's like a
Oh,
premium. So BMW, Mercedes, Tesla, Volvo, they're all starting to include on their upper end cars. They're including Atmos, either standard or as an option. So it's becoming a real thing.
that's interesting. So if it's in a car, if you've got an Atmos sound system, how like that's not if you're just listening to the regular satellite radio or something like that, that's coming through the Atmos system, but it's like those channels probably aren't designed for Atmos, right?
Yeah, if you're listening to regular satellite or whatever you listen in your car, it's going to be stereo.
It's going to be stereo, right?
It's going to be stereo. So you'll have stereo in the front. Then, of course, you can have, ancillary speakers in the back, and it's still going to be stereo. The left rear and the right rear, those will each be commensurate with the front, the front left and the front right. So, it'll fill the car, but that's different than Atmos, where you can actually pinpoint specific instruments in different points around a room or a car where you can go, wow, I can really hear the strings over here, or I can hear the guitars over here or behind me. So it's really something. My partner Will Kennedy and I just finished up doing the Foreigner hits.
Okay.
And wow, does it sound great? I mean, we've been doing a bunch of stuff. We did the new Dave Matthews album that was released. We're also starting to do Dave Matthews catalog. We've done B-52s. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, Black Sabbath, and everything else in between. So we're doing quite a bit of stuff like that.
Well, that's excellent. So if you wanted to, like, let's say you've got a car and you've got this system that's already built in there and you want to listen to the Atmos sound,
right?
Would you buy these? Would they be albums you would buy that you would then, you download onto your phone or something like that? It's like a regular file that plays, or how would you actually experience it?
You get it through, it's a downloadable file or a streamed file, like on Tidal and Amazon. It's a streamed file, so
Okay.
it'll actually just show up in the Atmos. Apple's a little more complicated, a little more cumbersome for a lot of different reasons, but again, it's all downloadable. I'm not sure what they compress down to be transmitted, but when we do a mix here, it's a 1 gigabyte or larger file.
Okay, so you can either stream it or you can actually own the tracks. You can download it and then keep it.
I think I don't know. There's no physical way to do it quite yet. I think that very, very rare cases they can actually put it onto a Blu-ray disc. You can actually have the Atmos, but I think generally it is a stream thing. And
okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes.
Okay.
And Apple Music features it. That's like one of their main pages, and you can hear the Atmos stuff. And generally with Apple, you can switch back and forth. You can hear the stereo version, or hit a button and hear the Atmos version. You can hear the difference. And even though you're listening with two ears, with say a pair of headphones both times, for me it's really shocking how much clearer the Atmos mix is, even if it's folded down to binaural. It's really stunning.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to check that out. I mean, I have to see if I can get myself a pair of headphones or something and listen to it, because it sounds like it. And like you said, we might even just do a track that we did and see what it sounds like in Atmos with the full orchestra and everything else.
Yeah.
Very cool, for sure.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive.
Cool. And then, so we did get a couple of other questions regarding your sort of history of the different genres you've produced, because apparently, and I didn't necessarily know this. I mean, I'm familiar with like the John Hiatt's and OAR and Faith No More.
Right.
But I guess you've got a pretty deep background in alternative bands. The specific question was, so many of these early alternative bands that you work with, Howlin' Maggie, School of Fish, Sons of Freedom, Quick Step, Green Apple.
Yeah.
Right. So these were alternative before there was a lane made by the alternative explosion.
Mm-hmm.
So, the question is, how different was working with this genre after it hit mainstream? And I guess a related question is, if you were working with some of these alternative bands, to what I'm guessing the records you produced might have had an impact on that whole movement.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really definitely happened to me, especially with a band, something like Faith No More, who basically created a genre for all intents and purposes. When we made that record, the argument from the record label was, listen, this is great, but record labels don't play rap metal. And that was true at the time. But then the band toured across the United Kingdom a number of times, toured the United States, and then broke through in the United States. And they, got to, I think it was number 8 or 9 on the charts with basically a rap metal song. And, it established kind of a genre. But even before it, they had a song called We Care a Lot, which actually predated some of the Run DMC stuff that was done with, say, Aerosmith and other bands. They actually were really on the bleeding edge or the vanguard of a new kind of style of music, honestly. So that's one of those bands that just kind of did it. They broke through in a way that was pretty singular and impressive.
Yeah, that's it. And you were right there from the beginning with those guys, right? Didn't you do, like, you knew them before, like, you took them
I recorded them in my parents' suburban garage while I was going to UC Berkeley. I was going to school, and a couple of the guys were going to school there. And so I recorded them when they were initially called Sharp Young Men, and then Faith No Man, and then Faith No More. But yeah, so I think I was like 21 at the time, or 22, and they were like 19 years old. And yeah, we were recording way back when. They put out a little single. So yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to be able to stay with them and work with them for quite a long time, which is really great.
Well, that's fantastic. And because, as you said, if that was a groundbreaking album for that genre, then you were right there at the forefront of it. Yeah. That's some real history right there.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
I feel very fortunate that you decided to work on this project, and that we did this together, because that's, history means a lot to me, especially, in this business. It's like, those classic artists of days gone by, you got to really respect that. So it's
Thank you. Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Well,
been an
fortunately,
absolute honor.
my discography is so varied and eclectic because I do everything kind of between the beautiful and the brutal. I mean, I've worked with Sheryl Crow on some of her stuff. I've worked with John Hyde. I've worked with people who do more melodic things, and then I've also worked with really heavier, uglier stuff as well, and like rock and stuff in the middle. So I've got a very varied discography, and my interests are quite wide and open because I like to kind of hear new things and try new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of brings me to the last question that we got, which was, do you have a favorite genre that you prefer to produce?
The answer to that is no, because the for better or worse, the way I've been able to keep some sort of longevity is that anytime I work and have some success in one genre, I kind of chafe and I want to move on to a different kind of music. So I usually push in another direction. And that all comes from me being a young person at 13 years old, listening to pop radio, which included the Carpenters and a bunch of other stuff, but also being in a band that played like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin stuff, or so I've always was pushed and pulled because I love pop music. I love that sense of melody. I love the immediacy of pop music, but also like darker, heavier stuff that kind of has maybe a more unique arrangement and something that's more challenging to listen to. So for me, if I stay too long in any one genre, I will then kind of feel the urge to kind of push and go into the other direction. So that's kind of been for better or for worse, that's been my approach to this career, and it seems to work for longevity. I think I probably could have been more successful if I stuck with one genre and pushed through, but I like the fact that it's been pretty varied.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I guess it depends on how you define success, but man, you've worked on some amazing records, some incredibly
Thank you,
successful records, and
thank you. Yeah,
even the ones that don't necessarily have commercial success, some
yeah,
just fantastic artists. So
yeah.
it's for
Thank
me,
you.
it's been a real honor to work with
Well,
you. I
thank
really
you,
appreciate the fact that
thank
you
you.
took the time, and let's do it again. We'll
Yeah,
figure it
that
out.
sounds good to me. More recording sounds good. If you want to try some Atmos, that sounds good. Whatever, it'd be great. And in the interim, when you come into town, holler so we can grab a bite, a beverage. I'd love to get some physical copies. That'd be really a thrill.
Absolutely, I've got the shipment in. I'm actually traveling up to Washington State tomorrow for the rest of this week. But next week I'll be back. I'll get in touch with you. We'll pick a day. We'll pick a time to get together. It'd be awesome.
That'd be
So
fantastic. And I know we probably aren't going to talk about this too much, but I was certainly intrigued about how you raised the funds for this recording. So that was really a nice sidebar of something that's very interesting. That is absolutely unique. So that was really cool.
yeah, absolutely. That's something definitely talk about sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, cool, Matt. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Appreciate it.
My
And
pleasure.
I'll touch base soon. Like I said, we'll talk next week and we'll figure out a time.
Sounds good.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All
All right.
right. Bye bye.